maybe comment on the feeling of hopefulness, because of course we want to feel like the same we want to feel positive no matter what happens, no matter whether there's ups and downs, or like um, no matter how the dynamic of recovery goes. But sometimes it's helpful to admit sometimes we might not feel as hopeful, or we might be very um, scared or doubt ourselves. And even that, those moments, they're still fine. They're still not blocking our recovery. We don't have to feel hopeful all the time for our recovery to continue. Really, it's not a requirement. So sometimes even when we do feel not so hopeful, not so positive, it doesn't mean that our recovery is stalled. It doesn't mean this at all, because I've felt this way, this kind of like oh, nothing is changing, I'm stuck, I feel like, or I feel like I went backwards, all this kind of like negative thinking. I had this throughout journey so many times, and yet it didn't prevent the recovery from unfolding. So just to maybe normalize that sometimes we might feel very down, and there is nothing wrong with that. We can just acknowledge that, look at it with compassion and understanding, and then keep moving forward, not thinking that, oh no, I have to force myself to feel hopeful right now, because that's not like really like kind of like a must. From a more practical perspective, what what helped me feel more hopeful or more supported, oftentimes for me, knowing that other people went through this process and they get on the other side, just knowing that there is a possibility, that was helpful. So sometimes I would kind of like revisit certain recovery journeys that were at that time on Daniel's channel, for example. There were not so many stories, by the way, at that time, but still there were some. And whenever I felt like I wanted just to support myself mentally, that things like changes are possible, I would sometimes go and revisit those stories just to help myself like see that, okay, right now it's probably like, right now it sucks, but it can be better, right? So, exposing ourselves to people who have done this, this process on their own, exposing ourselves to resources that help us feel more okay, not more normal, right? So hanging out in that kind of environment also helps. And by hanging out, I don't mean that we need to always like like just talk to that person and so on. It might be just being in the presence, let's say, of like let's say revisiting some article that makes us feel more hopeful, or watching a video that kind of like gives us a little bit of this kind of like support. Those tiny things that could be something that can get us through difficult times. Now, again, when it comes to this kind of recovery stories and success stories, we also need to be mindful of the moment when we start comparing ourselves to others and feel bad about that. Then it's usually a good time to let go of checking like other success stories. But if watching someone's success story or recovery story gives us the sense of like, okay, if someone else could do it, then I can as well, this could be a source of that support, and that like knowing that it is possible. Another maybe unexpected source of this support could be coming from observing people, maybe in our lives, whom we know, who don't really struggle with insomnia, but who sometimes have rough nights, and just observing how they are responding to those nights. Right. For me, for example, I would sometimes see that my husband might not have like a great night. Maybe he would be struggling to fall asleep, and I was just like looking at his reactions, how he is behaving in that situation, right? And this really started giving me a new perspective, seeing that someone else also might be awake at night. They might not necessarily like it, but seeing a different reaction already helped me feel like, okay, maybe I can also have a different response to that, right? So exposing ourselves to a new way of responding things, even if it's like means that we are just observing someone else, how they are handling it, that can already a source of this inspiration and support, because if someone else can do it, it's also available to us. And then another source of this kind of inner support could be coming from um, having some sort of like a evidence, um, diary, not diary, but this kind of like a bag of evidence, I call it. Basically, whenever we went through something like difficult, but then it ended up being okay, we learned something from it, right? It showed how strong we are, how capable we are, right? Sometimes it makes sense to keep those moments in mind, so that when we feel a little bit lost, a little bit, discouraged, to go back to those moments, just to remind ourselves, hey, I remember I felt very similarly and things ended up being okay. So we can use our own personal experience from the past to help ourselves feel more supported. And this is how we can start like gently, bring back this feeling of hopeful again. But again, even if we don't feel hopeful on a particular day or night, it doesn't mean that we are, that something is wrong with the recovery process. I felt this kind of like lack of hopeless, so many times on the path. So it's not a block in recovery.